My name is Benny Robinson. I was born on the 11th of April 1933 and I was at Brady from 1948 to 1951. I lived in Whitechapel. I had a brother and a sister. We lived in a block of flats called Chelsea Buildings in Princelet Street. And well, like most of the Jewish population there, our close relatives always lived a few streets away. So we had an aunt and an uncle and things like that there. My grandparents came to this country around about 1890, 1895 from Poland, and another set of grandparents came from Romania. My paternal grandmother was born in Manchester. My own parents, my mother was born in Whitechapel and my father was born in Manchester. Originally, my grandparents would have arrived as refugees. I think my grandfather arrived with his wife and a brother, but I have no other recollection of any of the other members of the family coming here. My father was a Hoffman presser. I think the average wage around 1948-49 was about £5 a week. And he was also a very heavy smoker. So what with the cigarettes and what with the steam coming from the presses, he suffered with bronchitis quite badly. My mother was a tailoress, and so she used to go out and alter garments and things like that. So they were both working people. We'd just come out of the war. We'd just come out of the Second World War. There were bombed buildings all over the place. I think my recollection is that there was still some form of rationing. We had nowhere really to go to except as youngsters to the local dance hall, the Lyceum or the Royal, or to the local cinema. But sometimes you couldn't afford to go to either because we just didn't have any money. I went to a secondary school at Myrtle Street, and most of the boys that I grew up either went to a secondary school or went to a grammar school, and nearly all of them left the age of 14 or 15. West End of London had many Jewish people who were well established in this country, and they were startled, perhaps would be the right word, to see the influx of the Jewish immigration that came to this country from Poland, Lithuania, and other parts of Eastern Europe in the 1890s, 1900s. And they were alarmed for two reasons. One, I think that these Jewish boys who could only speak Yiddish would be a threat to the established, wealthier Jewish people living in the West End of London. But there was also a philanthropic attitude about it, and they felt that they ought to help in some way. And so the original idea, as I understood it, was to set up a club for working lads in the East End. There was never any mention that it would be a Jewish club. It was a working club for Jewish lads in the East End. The fact that the population in Whitechapel of Jewish people was between 150,000 and 200,000 at the time meant that every boy who joined the club was Jewish. And so it became a Jewish club by facts on the ground rather than a particular reason to do that. And that's how it remained. In later years, quite a number of non-Jewish boys joined Brady and made a great impression on them. But non-Jewish boys were never stopped from joining the club. It was just the sheer number of Jewish people who lived in the area that turned it into a Jewish club de facto. It was my mother, really, who wanted me to go to Brady, and she went to Miriam Moses at the Girls' Club and asked Miriam Moses whether I could go to Brady. And I think it was Miriam Moses who put in a word, and I was accepted as a member. And that gave me something to do in the evenings, because I had nothing else to do, really. There was no television, there was nothing like that at all. The purpose of the club was to instill some sort of characteristics, if you want the word, into these young boys. People say that not many of the boys in the East End went to university. I can only recall 2, maybe 3 boys going to university. To me, Brady was the university. Brady was our university. When we went to Brady, we learned how to speak, we learned how to respect our elders, we developed loyalties. If you were artistic, you were encouraged to join the drama group or the concert party. If you were sporting, you were encouraged to do boxing or football or volleyball or something like that. So you had a good all-round education at what I would call the Brady University. We had to do 2 activities a week. Every boy who went to Brady had to do 2 activities a week. I think the subs were 6pence a week, if I recall rightly. And I was never one for sport. I was more involved with writing and things like that. And so I joined the drama group. I was with the concert party for a little while. And the manager at the time was called Freddie Friedman. And Freddie Friedman was a really gentle character. I think he was the first paid leader at Brady. You always saw him, before you saw him actually, you saw this pile of smoke coming from his pipe. He always walked around with his pipe. He was a very gentle man, but didn't seem to show any great interest in a specific area of what the boys were doing. He was much more of an administrator. It really came to life when Charles Spencer took over at Brady. Now, Charles was not one for sport. No one would say that Charles was one for sport, but he was certainly one for the arts and the concert party and things like that. And it was Charles more than anybody else that developed the concert party, brought out the talent of some of the youngsters at Brady. Charles was the editor of the Brady Bulletin. The magazine had been run by managers for many, many years. And I think Charles spotted in me perhaps some sort of talent for writing and asked whether I would like to take over. So I became the first boy to edit a magazine for boys. Now, before then, under Charles, the writing was of a very, very high standard, but there was very little news about what the boys were doing. When I took over, the standard of writing dropped, but there was much more news about the activities of the boys. And so I had changed it around, so it became a boys' club magazine. I remember writing about the visit of Princess Margaret to the Brady Girls' Club. I wrote that up and I was quite chuffed about that. I also remember when I used to go to watch Brady at the football grounds, watching football matches, and I started to write reports about their football matches. And then on a Sunday afternoon after the match, I would write a report and take it down to the local newspaper, the East London Advertiser. And I was really, really chuffed when they used my report in the paper without changing a word. And that gave me the idea that maybe I could become a journalist. And so it was the combination of the Brady Bulletin and watching sports reports that made me think that perhaps I could do it. I think that the thing that I liked most of all, surprisingly enough, was going to the socials, going to the dances on a Sunday evening. I wasn't a bad dancer. I must admit, I wasn't a bad dancer, which made me popular with the girls there at the time. So while a lot of the rest of the boys were talking about their exploits on the football pitch, I was quite happy dancing around. I used to look forward to that. So when I went to the Brady Girls building some months ago, going into that hall again where I used to do all the dancing, it looked much smaller than I imagined. To me, it was a huge hall, but it's much, much smaller. So the memories I have of Brady are particularly of the socials, mixing with the other girls, mixing with friends, and generally being part of a community which I loved. The other thing I found, I'd mentioned earlier that I thought that Brady was a university. The other thing I found was the immense loyalty and affection that boys who had been to Brady had 50, 60, 70 years after they had been there. There was this tremendous affection for the club, and that is the sort of thing that is amazing. I went to camp. I went to a camp in Dymchurch. It was the first time I'd ever seen the sea. When we went to the Isle of Wight, I'd never seen the sea before. And we went to Dymchurch, and then we went to Freshwater in the Isle of Wight. That was the one where I saw the sea for the first time. Loved camp, loved it. That's where you made friends. You had this camaraderie, which was very good. I never went to skeet all that much. I think I'd probably gone to skeet maybe a half a dozen times in the whole of the 3 years that I'd been there. And the reason was not because I couldn't go to skeet or I couldn't afford to go to skeet. It was because on the Saturday and Sunday, the weekends, I was in Fleet Street delivering photographs from the picture agencies to the national newspapers. I thought it would show me the way around the newspapers, and from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 9 o'clock at night, I was paid 10 shillings, which is 50 pence. And but I was so involved in trying to become a journalist that I couldn't risk missing out on that. I didn't become a journalist as such until I came out of the RAF. As I said, I'd done reports for the East London Advertiser, so I had a sort of rough background of what things were about. When I came out of the RAF, I applied for a job on a paper called the Stratford Express, which was the local paper here, which had a circulation of about 86,000 a week. Huge circulation. And the paper was very fortunate in that it had two professional football teams in the area, West Ham United and Leyton Orient. And I was given the job. The editor said he would take me on for £4 a week. And then I did a very stupid thing. I told the editor I liked football. Well, none of the journalists wanted to do football. That meant working weekends. I said I liked football, so I became a journalist at 20. I was sports editor at 21 of the Stratford Express, and I started sending little snippets of news from West Ham United and Leyton Orient to the Evening Standard. There were three newspapers at the time in London, the Star News and the Evening Standard. I decided to send news just to the Evening Standard in the hope that they might recognise that they were exclusive. And I was approached by the Standard and offered a job there. And so at 23, I joined the Evening Standard, the youngest journalist ever to get into Fleet Street. The youngest ever. And the reason you couldn't get there before was because the trade unions were so strong that they had age limits on when you could and when you couldn't start. So that was quite a feather in my cap. And I stayed at the Evening Standard for 35 years. And then when I left, I'd been the longest serving journalist on the Evening Standard. I also wrote for the Sunday Express on sport and gained a number of awards for football writing. This all goes back to starting at Brady. Let me say straight away that I can't take really any great credit for the book. This was Michael Lazarus's baby, and he did 90% of what was going on, maybe even more. Mike Yershon and I were invited to come along and to sort out the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of magazines and letters and articles, and that is what we did. We said, well, this one is important, that one's important, and we had to be careful to make sure that each generation of boys were fairly represented in the book. So yeah, we enjoyed it. Michael and I enjoyed it, but Mike Lazarus was really the architect of the book. I think that there is a wide difference between the different generations who went to Brady. So when I went to Brady in the 1940s and 1950s, as I say, there was no television. We didn't have anything like that at all. So our whole world revolved around going to the club. 10 years on, people could not only go to the club, but they could go other places. They could go on holidays abroad, which I had never been on. And people of my age and time at Brady had never been on. So the times had changed. I think the legacy is loyalty, companionship. The words of the Brady song, "We know our manners, we spend our tanners, we are respected wherever we go." I think that perhaps sums it up. We were respected, we looked after ourselves, we were friends, and 50, 60, 70 years afterwards, we're still friends. And when we hear of somebody who sadly has passed away, you might not have seen them for 40 years, but I remember so-and-so, and I remember, and it clicks, and it's a strange situation. I've never experienced anything where I've been to an organisation for 3 years and had so much affection 60 years afterwards.